Welcome to the 5th episode of This Week in the Metaverse. We're here to break down 3 news items from the past week which we think are important to the development of the Metaverse and on which we think we can provide unique perspective and expertise. Today's 3 topics that we're going to cover are, first, Sheryl Sandberg's departure from Meta, formerly known as Facebook, and how the company's Metaverse strategy fits into her departure from the Wall Street Journal. Second, Neal Stephenson, the father of the Metaverse, the author of Snow Crash, is launching a Metaverse blockchain, Lamina 1, and that's from Cointelegraph. And then lastly, we're going to discuss Playful Studios, which is founded by the creators of Words with Friends and the studio behind Lucky's Tale. They announced a $46 million funding round, the Wildcard Alliance, and a new Web3 game. And that's from VentureBeat. So we'll dive into those 3 items. But before we do, we have a short announcement from our friends at Roundhill Investment. This podcast is brought to you by Roundhill Investments, the advisor to the Roundhill Ball Metaverse ETF. The Roundhill Ball Metaverse ETF, which trades on the New York Stock Exchange under the ticker symbol METV, is the largest dedicated metaverse fund in the United States. The ETF tracks an index developed by Ball Metaverse Research Partners, a metaverse-focused indexing and research company headed by industry expert Matthew Ball. For a prospectus and more information, please visit roundhillinvestments.com/ETF/METV. Read carefully. Investing involves risk, including possible loss of principal. Investors should consider the investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses carefully before investing. Distributor Foreside Fund Services, LLC. Okay, so jumping right into Meta, Facebook's big news that COO Sheryl Sandberg is leaving the firm. Although this was announced a few weeks ago, it was only a matter of time before a news outlet got the scoop on the why she's leaving, and sure enough, it does seem like part of it has to do with the company's pivot to the metaverse. As the Wall Street Journal writes, Sandberg sees Mr. Zuckerberg's pivot to the so-called metaverse as a multi-year project that she wasn't eager to take on, not least because it doesn't directly entail the use of her core strengths in building advertising businesses. Although the article focuses mostly on allegations of or the potential misuse of company resources or just investigations looking into if she did that, this nugget was quite telling as to the rationale for her departure. Meta's pivot to the metaverse pivots away from her strengths in running the digital advertising business. There'll be an entire new business model and economy built around the metaverse strategy, and she's probably just not the right person to lead it anymore. So, Yon, your thoughts on what this means for Meta and Facebook and the potential risk of further talent drain as the transition to an entire new business goes on?
You know, it's obviously, I know people want to focus to some extent on more of the gossipy side of things. You know, I have no interest in relating to that. We'll leave that to the media outlets to talk about any wrongdoing. So let's not refer to that at all. But the interesting piece, this is obviously an inflection point for Meta and for Facebook. You have the executive that really single-handedly have built one of the most impressive internet businesses in a generation with what Sheryl Sandberg has accomplished at Meta, at Facebook. Now, I don't even want to get to the good or the bad. We all know the challenges. This is a different episode to talk about the moral landscape of what Facebook has built. But definitely this is an inflection point. And I think there is a dramatic shift that is most likely happening at Facebook as we speak. We've seen a lot of people from their Web3 crypto project moving out of Facebook to pursue new projects on their own or joining crypto native companies like Coinbase and others. And then we're seeing the extraordinary investment in Facebook Reality Labs, Meta Reality Labs, which is really the division or the organization internally at Facebook that is responsible for building the future of the company, which very much directly relates to the emergence of the metaverse. And another example of that transformation, Matthew, is that the new CTO of Roblox was the person who led the engineering of Facebook Reality Labs and their VR division and Oculus overall. And so everything we're seeing from Meta highlights that although their money and their revenue generation and potentially majority of their market cap is associated with Meta V1.0, which was the internet business Sheryl Sandberg helped to build, that it was based on advertising, it is clear that Zuckerberg, as founder and CEO, is taking the company to a future that is based and built on top of the promise of the metaverse, the next iteration of the internet, VR, AR, and potentially also decentralized technologies with Web3. That is a big transformation. And so regardless of the personal thing that we're pursuing with Sheryl Sandberg, this is obviously a massive transformation, a DNA shift in the organization. And it may be the case, and we don't know because we don't know Sheryl Sandberg personally, but it may well be the case that she felt that this next iteration of the company is not a future that she feels she's uniquely suitable to help build.
Yeah, I agree. And, I think, this isn't the first time, just for people who are not familiar so much with the history of Facebook Meta, this is not the first time they've tried to build alternative revenue sources. If we just think about it purely as a financial exercise, a lot of times Western social media companies have looked to China and been what's been successful in China and tried to replicate that. And a big initiative was live shopping, live streaming, e-commerce. And that's huge in Asia. It's huge in China. It has not taken off at all in the West. And so that was something they tried as well. But that's more adjacent to social networking. It's promoted in content. It's still somewhat broadly digital advertising. It's all adjacent. This is going to be an entirely new economy, an entirely new business model. And I'm just curious to see what other moves are made now. Who replaces her, obviously, is a big one, but even not at the COO level, as we go down the ranks, who comes into Reality Labs, who's really driving the economic engine behind this and the business decisions, because they're not going to replace advertising revenue by selling VR headsets. It's never going to be big enough. There needs to be a content engine. There needs to be something else behind it. And how they get there is a big question mark. I still think there's a lot of uncertainty as to how they monetize this thing long term. If everything we believe in interoperability and breaking down walled gardens happens, they're not going to have the walled garden profit share that Apple, Google have on mobile today. And so how they get to a point where, this becomes a profitable revenue engine to replace the advertising business is still a huge question mark. And so I think with that, we'll move on to our second topic of the day. This is quite interesting, and we'll have a little teaser here as well, because we're going to have in a couple weeks, we're going to have Neal Stephenson, the father of the Metaverse, come on into the Metaverse. So stay tuned for more there, but we'll just give a little teaser today of our thoughts about what was announced. And, as Cointelegraph writes, Neal Stephenson, the author who coined the term Metaverse 30 years ago, is launching a Metaverse-focused blockchain project called Lamina One. He has also revised his vision for the Metaverse, stating that the experience is likely to be geared more toward flat 2D screens rather than VR or AR, such as headsets and lenses, as in the model proposed by Meta and Microsoft. Stephenson is a popular speculative fiction author who explored the concept of a virtual reality world called the Metaverse in his sci-fi novel Snow Crash in 1992. Outside of writing, the 62-year-old has also served as the chief futurist for an augmented reality firm called Magic between 2014 and 2020. According to an announcement on Wednesday from OG crypto investor and former Bitcoin Foundation chairman Peter Vesenis, he and Stephenson have co-founded a new Layer 1 blockchain called Lamina One that they hope will act as the base layer for the open metaverse. So there's a lot to unpack here for our listeners, but Yon, your thoughts on what this means, as the metaverse develops?
Yeah, first, big announcement, seeing someone who is really sparked the world's imagination. Me personally, at Super Social, also we give Snow Crash as a book for every new person who joins the team. So it's phenomenal to see Neal Stephenson really getting into the space. I know he's been a chief futurist and a part-time level at a company like Magic Leap, I think a few years ago, but this is a whole new level of engagement and not only going into Web3, but building a layer 1 blockchain with no other than, Peter, who, as you've mentioned, was the Bitcoin Foundation chairman. And so two OGs coming in to build a new layer 1 blockchain for enabling an open metaverse. I think what's really interesting here, and I don't want to get into the complexities of what they're building. I think we're going to talk about that with them when we host them on the podcast. But I think what's really interesting is, and what I would love to unpack with them and better understand is, when they say this is going to be a blockchain that focuses on enabling an open metaverse, what exactly that means? How is it going to be different than all the other blockchains? Isn't that the case that all blockchains are supposed to, by definition, enable an open metaverse? And so, right, like the whole promise of a decentralized internet is that it will be at the core of enabling an open metaverse that is interoperable and so on and so forth. And so I'm just really, really curious to better understand, what does it mean for builders? And, in my case, we're developers, we're building experiences on Web3. And so I would really want to understand what is different, what is unique, how are they going to do something that is also environmentally sustainable? So it's going to be really interesting, but this is good news. This is great news. Two OGs from Metaverse, from crypto, coming together to build a new layer one. They also brought, I think, their chief strategy officer is Tony Parisi, who was head of AR and VR at Unity, another big proponent of the Metaverse. And so I think it's really going to be interesting to see how they translate their vision of what is an open Metaverse and how is this blockchain is going to be built. But I will say this, even with all the funding that they've raised, and they have some great investors over there, this is going to be a really interesting journey for them. This is going to be a long journey. It's not easy to build a new type of blockchain. You need an ecosystem of developers, and you need so many things that are at a very high level of complexity. Plus the notion that we are at a bear market now, not just in mainstream financial markets, but also in crypto. And so overall, all this is to say, I'm ecstatic about the announcement. I am excited that people like Peter and Neal are coming into this frontier as an entrepreneur, as someone who is helping to build this movement. And I'm incredibly curious to better understand what exactly they're building that is going to be different, differentiated, and enable an open metaverse in a way that no one else is doing now.
I think exactly what you said. You know, it's exciting that there's some real OGs in there that are so excited about this concept of the metaverse and are putting, you know, everything behind it to build it. And the other thing that stood out to me from Neal was, and this was in a different interview he did, but you know, the definition we just read is not just about VR and AR anymore. It's device agnostic, you know, and I think, you know, I was reading words from him where basically it was along the lines of when he wrote Snow Crash, he couldn't envision a world where we would have a screen in our pocket or you'd be able to take your TV anywhere, let alone do all these things on TV screens with consoles that you can today. And so, you know, VR for him was the only way to make that stuff portable and make it close to you. But what we've seen in the last 30 years is that's just not correct. You know, we have everyone has a smartphone. People have watches, or eventually we'll have glasses. And so, you know, shifting his definition, which I think for a lot of people has caused a lot of confusion, because whenever they think metaverse, they go to Snow Crash and they think VR. I think having the person who was behind that saying, well, things have changed and we're changing with it, I think that's really important for kind of, you know, what we've been after. A large part of our podcast has been trying to build a consensus around what we're doing, what the metaverse is, and how we're building it. And I think having someone like him, you know, step back and say, you know, it's not just VR. There's a much broader concept here. I think that's really powerful as well.
Yeah, and look, I think if we connect actually the two items, the previous one and this one, Matthew, you know, I think there's going to be a moment in time where people are going to realize that VR is cool, VR is important, but it's a small piece of a much bigger thing. You know, the iPhone or the mobile phone or the smartphone will continue to be, for the foreseeable future, the gateway to the internet, the gateway to the metaverse. Sure, there are going to be other form factors, other type of displays. You want to call it augmented reality, you want to call it virtual reality. I think in a way, Snow Crash, and to a larger extent, Ready Player One as a book and as a movie have really cemented this perspective that Meta is the biggest proponent of, which is the metaverse is going to be accessible through VR. The metaverse is VR, and this could not be further away from the truth. And, you know, we talked at length about that and about the metaverse being a device agnostic, almost repeating that statement in every single episode. And we're going to keep doubling down on that sentiment that the metaverse is device agnostic, and it will be accessible and represented through multiple modalities, multiple form factors, even physical spaces, ultimately creating one big interoperable virtual experiences that people can access. And I think that's exciting. And I think it's great that people like Neal Stephenson, who almost accidentally envisioned, you know, VR, as he likes to say, recognize and understanding that really the way we're going to access these experiences is much more diverse and technologically complex than what people tend to assume by, you know, reading meta news.
And if you want to dive more into building an open democratic metaverse, stay tuned for our next episode of Into the Metaverse, dropping on Tuesday with Professor Udi Shapiro from the Weizmann Institute in Israel. We go way deep into that area, and it's just truly fascinating and mind-blowing, kind of his views on that. So if you're really interested in crypto democracy, you gotta check that out when it drops. And so lastly, we're going to move over to more of a gaming-centric news item, but it is quite interesting. We saw Playful Studios raise a new funding round, and they've entered the Web3 gaming market. As VentureBeat writes, Playful Studios, which is created by the makers, founded by the creators of Words with Friends, and they published Lucky's Tale. They unveiled a Web3 game and raised $46 million for their Wildcard Alliance division. The Wildcard Alliance wants to onboard the next billion gamers to Web3 with ease, accessibility, and fun at the forefront. To move into the blockchain gaming space, the McKinney, Texas-based company created the Wildcard Alliance, a division that is making a battle game called Wildcard. It has elements of a game like Hearthstone or Magic the Gathering, where you manage card decks, but it also has action gameplay of a multiplayer online battle arena game, or an arena game like Rocket League. So that sounds like quite the ambitious project, a CCG mixed with a MOBA. One thing that stood out to me is from that is just that this is kind of much different than what they've done in the past. But it's quite ambitious, Yon. Any thoughts around what they're building?
Well, first, I think just to clarify to people reading the details, this is a project that they've been working on for several years. This is not something they came up with last year. And yes, it's incredibly ambitious. And I think they've added it about a year ago. Reading the article, they've added the layer of Web3 when the co-founder and CEO of the project realized that Web3 can help them make the project more exciting in connecting communities and building communities. And so let me separate for a second the Web3 piece. The vision for the game is incredibly ambitious. It's almost like they are taking on a couple of big genres, right? The card battler game and MOBA, and adding real-time strategy. And I think if they make that happen, this is going to be an incredibly exciting property and an incredibly exciting product in a game world for people to experience and be part of. The trailer is really, really cool. The graphics. There is a feeling of there's a lot of inspiration from League of Legends and things like that, but this could well become the next big franchise of the decade. And I think adding the Web3 piece and NFTs of how this enables better communities that are part of the experience, I think ultimately that's what attracted this big funding round. It's a 46 million Series A. It's a large round for any project, any venture, especially in gaming, and especially now. It was led by Paradigm, which is one of the biggest VCs that focused on Web3 and crypto, founded by one of the co-founders of Coinbase. So there's a lot of expertise and knowledge in that fund around Web3. This is an ambitious project. It's a big funding round. It's exciting to see that. And I can say as a builder in the space, it's great to see more projects coming to life by people who have built games in the past, that their main intention initially is not the token, it's the fun. And it's really about building something that people will enjoy. And I think we've been discussing before, and I don't think we're at the end of that, where a lot of core gamers are, incredibly unhappy about NFTs and do not want to see necessarily games built on blockchain and NFTs. And so I think it's really important that there's more vocal creators like Bettner, the co-founder of the Wildcard Alliance, who are coming in and really wanting to build incredibly exciting experiences and game worlds using Web3 technologies.